Okay, welcome everyone. Today's conversation is about a challenge that maybe more data doesn't always mean better decisions. We've now had this massive growth in the amount of data in the world, and the promise has been that data drives better decision making. Oracle has just done a big study that suggests that this might not be the case, that actually more data might be hampering decision making, and more data might make people feel overwhelmed and anxious, and maybe they don't feel that they have the right skills to turn this data into insights to help them with their decision making. So to explore this fascinating topic and study with me, I'm joined by James Richardson, who is the VP for Product Strategy and Analytics at Oracle.
That's right, yep.
So thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure.
You have had 30 years of experience in the analytics and BI industry.
Yeah.
You used to be a Gartner analyst.
Yeah.
You used to be the lead author for the BI and analytics
Yep, Magic Quadrant.
yes.
That's right. Yep.
And then you spent time at Click and Hyperion. So you know the industry very well.
Okay.
And I'm sure you've heard the promise that more data helps us make better decisions.
Sure.
So before we go into this, maybe we can start by talking about why you did the study at Oracle and tell us a little bit about the study.
Absolutely. So it's interesting, you raised the question of, does more data mean a better decision? And as far as we're aware, there has not actually been a big study that looks at how do people feel today. You mentioned my 30 career tenure in analytics. Analytics goes back a little bit longer than that. So after all of this time and all of this millions of euros and pounds and dollars, what is it like to make decisions today, either in our personal life or as part of work? So that's why we did that. The study is massive. I think it's the world's biggest study of decision making in the post-data world. 14,250 people across 17 countries. So it's a very, very large study indeed.
Yeah.
And we've titled it The Decision Dilemma because the results that came back really are very interesting. They show a really strong aspiration. People know they should be using data, but they don't find it easy. They often feel anxious or under pressure. And those findings were very, very clear. So for us, it's a kind of a wake-up call. Let's look at where we are today and figure out perhaps how do we really deliver on the promise, as you put it.
Interesting. So how would you describe this decision dilemma as you describe it?
I think the dilemma is the anxiety that comes from having the wealth of data that we have at our fingertips, but perhaps a limited amount of time within which to use it. I say the limited resource when you're making a decision is not data, it's time. That's for all of us, I suppose, in our lives. And one of the interesting findings was there was a significant number, I think it was 80% plus, of people that did the survey and that said that were at the point of making a particular decision, but were so overwhelmed by the data that they didn't make the decision. So the question is, how do we deal with that? How do we collapse that problem? So the dilemma is the dilemma that you face when you have so much data and so little time. Even worse than that, though, the thing that was really quite shocking to me was that 84% of people said that they'd experienced decision distress. So they felt, looking at a decision they'd made, they questioned it, they doubted themselves, they second-guessed themselves, they even regretted decisions. And that's no good, right? I suppose there's always going to be anxiety after the fact when you make a big bet of some description, whether that's in your business or in your private life. You buy a new house, you buy a new car, all those things. But you hope that you don't regret it after the fact.
Yeah, and I to some extent, I'm not massively surprised because I see this with lots of organizations I work with that they now have more data than ever before.
Yes.
And there has always been this challenge of data literacy to some extent. This ability, am I confident enough to turn this data into insights? Can I analyze it? Can I find the data? But what I really found striking about the study is that something like 80% of people said that had a negative impact on their quality of life. So it's really big, significant impact.
Yes, I think it was. If we so 14,000 people. If we just focus down on the working individuals, which is still a massive sample. It's 9,838 people in the sample that are employed. They're working people, and 3/4 of them, 76%, said that they felt that the data that they got in their working life was either they weren't ready to use it, or it was only suitable for data experts. Now, for me, I find that really difficult because data visualization, data storytelling has been part of my career for a long time. But I still think we face a reality in our organizations where there are data literacy challenges and people feel somewhat exposed. The other thing I think that is contributing to this is the data they get is partial or disconnected from the decisions. So they're still having to pass data to a decision. Now, if it's an embedded analytic application where it's part of a workflow process, it's direct, it's connected, it works very well. But if you take tactical or strategic decisions, the connection between the data that you get and the decision you need to make might be quite abstract. And I think that people are struggling very often to take the information they see on a dashboard. 70% plus people said that the dashboards they get don't relate to the decisions they make. So they're having to close that gap themselves, and that isn't a comfortable thing. And I think in many cases that's because analytics is a standalone activity where I'm looking at my analysis and then I've got to switch and pivot to my operations. So the disconnect there can sometimes be a problem, or at least that seems to be part of the backstory and context in the findings of the data.
So how is Oracle interpreting those insights, and what are you suggesting businesses do differently and individuals do differently?
I'm suggesting that we need to start from the point of the decisions that people make inside their organizations and work our way back towards what the data needs to be, what the analytics needs to be. I think very often we've allowed the technology to dominate and to provide self-service is great. I'm a great fan of it. But again, it's like, let's try and find our way to the value point. The other thing is connecting operational activity to to data, to analytics. If you look at things like, sorry, I'm going to get producty for a moment. If you look at things like Fusion Analytics, that connects operational activity to analytics in a way that's very direct and very tangible for people. I honestly think that context rules. The other thing that we found, and I think that is people feel that very often the decisions that have been made in the past, they have no access to. They may know somebody that made a decision. They may have that in their human intelligence around them. But is it tracked and managed and recorded? Can they do a closed loop analysis on it? And that for me is what decision intelligence is. In fact, 98% of the business people that we asked said that they wanted to use data to make decisions, the aspirations there, and 93% said that they bought into the idea of decision intelligence. And we define that as tracking, managing, and improving decisions, not building better analytics, but starting to get really proximate to the decisions and tracking that over time. Doing decision reviews. Very few organizations actually go and do a decision review today. Maybe the military does it. Maybe some medical professionals do it after the fact. But generally speaking, we get some analytics, we make a decision, we don't know what the outcome was, it's lost. Or we have to wait a long time, we don't capture the metadata around that.
So what would your advice to business leaders be then? How do they go about doing that?
My advice to business leaders would be, I guess, multiple avenues of this. One is absolutely data literacy is a key part of this. But I think when you look at and you talk to your data analytics professionals, think about outcomes, get them to help you build dashboards and data sets that relate directly to decisions that need to be made in your organization. And also look at embedding analytics into the flow of what people do every day, because that's where they do their work.
I agree. So my advice working with businesses is always start with your strategic challenges and actually formulate the questions that you want to have an answer to. And once you have those, you can then feed your analytics and data into those.
Into that process. And it was interesting. So 87% said it would be useful to know the prior results of similar decisions. So you need to be tracking it in the first place. And a similar percentage said, actually, we need to be able to close that loop in a way that we perhaps could not in the past. And you do that by getting proximate to what people actually do. So I think self-service, data visualization, all of those things, the requirement to explore data doesn't go away. But what we've got to think about predominantly, and you mentioned it yourself, relevance. Is what we deliver as data analytics professionals directly relevant to the activities that people are going to do? So there's a place for self-serve visualization, exploration, data science, machine learning, all of those things, but there's also a place for saying we need to deliver something in a workflow process. And that very clearly came out in the survey.
Interesting. So do you have any good examples of organizations that do this well, that others can learn from?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think this idea of decision intelligence is emerging across the industry. I think people that were good at data analytics were already doing it. One of my favourite ones is here in the UK, which is part of the National Health Service, biggest employer in Europe, I think. Huge volumes of data. They have part of their organisation called the National Health Service Business Service Authority that looks at data. They're a well-known Oracle customer. Billions of rows of data relating to prescriptions of drugs. Through connecting data to decision to workflow and delivering applications, they've helped pharmacists and general practitioners to reduce the amount of double prescriptions of things like antibiotics. So I think that starts from the fact that we know that we need to get better at making decisions around how we prescribe, and we need to be able to track that. And I think something like 49% of the pharmacies that were involved in this particular project changed the way they did things, so that 107,000 fewer people were on antibiotics. So very big. And those decisions were actually considered from the beginning of the process. So I would have said that organizations that are strong in terms of their approach to data and analytics today can do this, but for many, as we found in the survey, they aren't quite there yet.
Very good. So anyone who wants to see the study in a bit more detail, we will put a link in
Sure.
at the bottom of the video and the description.
And we could also provide a link to that NHS case study which is published.
That would be really good. Yeah. Actually, there's a video about how the NHS is using data on my channel as well, because I've done the interview. Finally, I guess I couldn't let you go without asking you about robot overlords, because I saw that the whole situation, more data, more decisions, is so complicated and complex that 70% of business leaders actually said that they would rather have a robot make a decision for them. Yeah. What do you think about that?
So I have to say that this study was part funded by our PR department, and that's a very PR thing. I think it's very interesting. It tells me that we are getting more comfortable with the idea of machine assistance or intelligence. I think the AI, you can't move for ChatGPT, you can't in the media everywhere. The way I think about people saying that they like a robot to make their decisions is more of they're looking for help. If you're happy to put your physical safety in the hands of a self-driving car, which is increasingly happening, then I can see that why people would be moving in that direction. But I don't think, Bernard, that people are looking to make themselves redundant. I tend to think that what they want is advice and assistance from technology. That aspiration is very, very clear in the study. People aren't saying data is bad. What they're saying is, I can't use it, or I'm anxious about it, or I'm drowning in it, help me. And obviously we have a limited capacity as humans to deal with data. So why not use machinery? So I think that the robot idea for me hides behind it the idea of AI assistance as a genuinely useful thing. And the idea that AI is, if you track and manage and gather data around decisions, then an AI can begin to learn that. And I think that is an inevitability for us right now, that will happen. 87% of people in the survey said that they thought there would be more of a need in future to justify and explain decisions. Question is, who are they justifying and explaining them to, which is interesting. I think that's absolutely the case. To finish quite a long answer, I think the Kirk-Spock duality is here. They want to be able to be like Captain Kirk, to be passionate and creative and use their experiential learning when they make decisions. But they also want a voice from somebody logical and rational, or something logical and rational. Could be Spock, could be an AI. And I think that is what they're seeing. They're saying, there's so much data, it's very difficult to deal with in the time that I've got, I need help. So I think that's what they're saying. They're not saying, I want to go lay on a beach. Maybe they are, I don't know, eventually.
Yeah, and I think for businesses, I think it's important to get this balance right, because we've come from a world where they had systems, they had business analysts who would then create dashboards.
Yes.
I think what we're saying in this conversation, we're agreeing on that we still need that. We need to, but we need to be really good at identifying the information needs and the purpose, and then providing this information in a really meaningful way, doing good data storytelling. We also need some self-exploration and data democratization to some extent, and allowing people to use data to help them make better decisions. And maybe we can bring some AI support into this process. Yeah. Because I've worked with fantastic organizations who actually created little centers where they said, we do a bit of hand-holding here. We give people access to a data scientist. They can just sit down with them and learn how to analyze data.
Yes.
But I think AI can help a lot. So we move from this pull concept to a more push concept, where the AI will push insights and help them analyze data.
So I think that's a really good point. You could argue that the priesthood of data professionals that we have in our organization today is a little bit like a cottage industry. And what we're getting to the point of is starting to industrialize more how we use data and analytics to make decisions. And if there's one thing that I think underlines all of this, it's the decision has to be a central thing in the concept of what you deliver in your data analytics program and your operational world to the people that are on the sharp point right now. I mean, things like operational decisions, they are greatly automated today already. You call the insurance if you crash your car. It's not a human's decision. It's it's usually a business rule engine that makes that decision for you, whether it goes to loss adjustment or whether you get paid out straight away. That's well known. The interesting thing is, as we move up from the operational to the tactical and strategic, where what if and scenario modeling and optimization appear, those operational decisions are tracked, we know, but the other ones are not. And it's adding that capability to close the loop on those longer time frame decisions where this really gets very interesting and potentially very powerful when you throw in AI that's learning into the mix.
Yeah, and I think out of those two, the analytics-driven AI, the data insights, the data democratization, and then you also have a third one, which is the automation, the fully automated decision-making.
Yes.
And I think what the study shows, I guess, is that people want a bit more of that. They
do.
Lots of even decisions in our private life. Should I invest my money here or there? How do I best reach my savings goals? How do I shop more healthy food? Yeah. These things, there will be more systems that will allow us to automate some of those little decisions, right?
Yes. I completely think this is the way it's going to go. I love the idea of the 4-day working week for humans. I think it's a great idea. I think the way that we get to that is increased productivity through machinery. And there's a lot of work within managerial decision making which could be automated. There's been some fear around that, I think, some resistance to automating white collar work, but it's starting to happen, at least at the very beginning. And I think that decision making is very, very complex. You know, when we talk about decisions, there's not just one type. There's a huge range of decisions in our organizations, with a whole degree of different levels of importance, of time horizon, of all those kinds of things. The argument that we're putting forward to a degree is that you need to be able to connect insight and outcome as well as decision. And I think that then you start to see potentially shifts that are back to the promise, right? When I first started in this industry, to speed up and improve decision making, number one goal for analytics and business intelligence as was. I think we could get there, but at the moment the humans are feeling the pressure, and I guess it's part of a phase shift in human society. In a way, we're getting used to living with data, or we're at least understanding that it's hard. The volumes to deal with are, making us to a degree anxious, and often people feel under pressure. So we can solve those problems.
I think little decisions we can automate, because we now have apps, for example, with our banks that say if you wanted to save £100 a month, it can make you suggestions. So maybe you're not wasting money on an expensive coffee, and you take it on. That is interesting. So little decisions can be automated. I think when it comes to really big decisions, we then need to really trust the AI. And this is, I guess, where we need a bit more work to really have this explainability.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's so high value decisions tend to be made by a group of people. That there may be a final decision maker, but that person really is the one that signs off on a decision made by a group of people. Now, those people could be incredibly skilled. They may have long life experience and have built internal heuristics, all fantastic. They've learned a lot. Humans are smart. But they may have blind spots, or the situation may be so dynamic that they can't really apply that behavior or that learning that they've used for all of their career. And at that point, one of the people, or maybe one of the entities in making that decision, should be a machine voice that says, oh, wait a minute, this is perhaps not what you thought. And that represents a very, very significant shift in that kind of thing. So it's getting to the point where we acknowledge what humans are good at, we acknowledge what machines are good at, and we bring those two together. So I think that idea of a collaborative decision where the inputs are known and the outcome is tracked over a period of time is really what businesses want to be able to do. And it might well be that one of those is the robot that you mentioned before.
Very good. Final question. What are your hopes or predictions when you look at the future of data and AI?
As a former Gartner analyst, when anyone says predictions, I'm like, oh, because we used to make them. They're very, very hard to make.
Yeah. Maybe your hopes.
My hopes are that we begin to value both sides of this. That we don't say, data-driven can be a dangerous thing. Data-driven, if we're entirely data-driven, we're losing human agency. If we're entirely human-driven, we're potentially chaotic. People, absolutely clearly, the data shows that people know that if they make decisions without data, they could be more risky, less accurate. Everyone knows that. Everyone understands it. What I look for is this hybrid decision models that we can build where we have that, and we benefit from both of those viewpoints. That's kind of a lofty goal. It's kind of probably a few years out. I think in the interim, I hope that we start to think about, as you said, the value point, the decision point first when we start doing any of this. I don't think you have to wait for new technologies to do decision intelligence. I think a lot of it, as I said before, is about the smarts in an organization and how you apply that. So my near-term hope is that people really begin to understand that they can do some of this already today. My longer-term hope is that we get to the point where we are able to understand and track and value and manage decisions in a much more clear way that brings both human and machine opinions. Because when you talk about explainability, interestingly, you're talking about an opinion. And a machine opinion is an opinion. And I think people haven't quite realized that. You ask humans to explain what they mean, well, there's nothing weird about that. So I think,
a lot of times even humans can't explain.
Very often they can't. And if you look at black box models, I suppose it's the same thing. You look at this kind of neural nets in that way. Yes, so I would like us to take the anxiety. We can't take the anxiety out of making decisions completely, because you're always throwing the dice to a degree. but I'd like us to make people more comfortable with the decisions they do have to make, whether that's in their personal or private lives. And funnily enough, you were saying about making the right decisions in your personal life when you know, should I buy this ice cream or should I buy this coffee? Those decisions, people generally, I think, know what the right decision is. But there's a whole business to be built around helping people make good decisions in their personal lives, and somebody will go for that. It may not be Oracle, because it's not Oracle's consumer, it's not usually our thing, but somebody will look at, how do I assist a person making their decisions that they make every day? And we all make hundreds of them. I don't want help choosing my socks, though. You know, I think that would be crazy.
Very good. Thank you so much, James, for your time today.
Pleasure, Ben.
That was fascinating. It's such a fascinating topic, and I would love to hear your views on this. As always, please share them with me. And if you ever want to re-listen or re-watch this, head to my YouTube channel or my podcast.